All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us here. I'm Aaron Moss, a senior research scientist at CloudResearch. And in this session, I'm going to be talking to you about how you can get the most from our Prime Panels platform. You might ask, what do I mean by get the most? Well, I mean, how can you reach either niche or hard to find groups of participants online? How can you manage data quality? And how can you ensure that along the way, you're making decisions that really maximize the chances your study is going to be successful? I'm excited to share some of this information with you, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so before we can talk about prime panels, I just want to make sure everyone has a good foundational understanding of what online panels are and how they're useful in research. So if you are in industry, you are undoubtedly already familiar with online panels. But if you work in academia, you may have some knowledge or some exposure or increasing exposure. And you may have noticed that in the last couple of years, academic researchers are increasingly turning to these panels that have traditionally been used for research in industry. The reasons why are pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So these online panels are actually not one source of participants, but they often aggregate together hundreds of different individual sample suppliers. And they do this to increase diversity. So just kind of at a baseline level, you end up with a population of people that better represent the demographics of, say, the United States than smaller crowdsourced platforms. They really increase the reach of the types of people that you're able to kind of screen through and find people who meet really specific demographic targets. And overall, they just increase sampling capabilities. So you're able to run projects with several thousand more participants. You can run tens of thousands of participants within a day or several weeks. You can gather hundreds of thousands of participants, something that would just take months, if not an entire year or more on smaller platforms. So to clarify that point, instead of working with a population of about 100,000 people per year, which might be the case on Mechanical Turk or a crowdsourced platform, you're talking about tens of millions of people. You're talking about international sampling capabilities, so just a much greater pool of people to draw from. And to kind of outline what some of these possibilities we're talking about are, here's a quick list I got from someone on our sales team of kind of notable or interesting projects that they've run for clients. So you can see here, 10,000 participants within a 24-hour period for a BuzzFeed news article release. You're able to find 100 people who engrave headstones, probably not the most common profession. You can see 50 small business HRDMs, that's human resource decision makers, located in Iowa. Further down the list, 1,200 truck drivers who drive a specific set of interstates within the United States. So there's a level of targeting, kind of precision and capability here, right, that you just can't get from other sources, and you can't get without aggregating these panels together. So that brings us to what is Prime Panels? Well, Prime Panels is the access point that CloudResearch offers to these large and diverse sources of online participants. If you've heard of Qualtrics panels or used it, if you've heard of Lucid and Dynata, right, these are all similar companies that essentially, that's essentially what Prime Panels is. However, unlike many of these other panel companies, CloudResearch has created a simple user interface that allows researchers to access participants from these online panels while controlling more of the study options than panels have typically offered in the past. So if you go and get a sample from Qualtrics, for example, right, they have project managers who are going to kind of manage that data collection for you. And that's still true with more complicated studies. So we have project managers that if you're going after a really difficult to find group, it might require some of our assistance. But CloudResearch has been trying to make more of these tools available to researchers so that they can manage studies themselves. So to help make clear how Prime Panels works and what you can do on the site, I'm actually going to walk through setting up a sample study. And this sample study is recently drawn from a tutorial that we recently had accepted at Advances in Methods and Practices in Psychological Science. So if you're familiar, that's the APS journal for methods and practices. And what this tutorial does is it not only explains the value of online panels and some things to kind of know to use them, but it explains how to effectively and efficiently sample from these platforms by doing things like screening people for demographic characteristics within the survey, or setting up quotas based on characteristics that you measure within the survey. And it also explains some things about how to terminate or replace people who provide low quality data as your project is live. And if you've attended some of the other talks earlier today, you've seen some of the data and conversation about problems with data quality in these online sources. So the hypothetical study that we're going to set up seeks to recruit 500 parents in the United States. We're going to specify that half of them have children who have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and half of them do not. We're also going to use some quotas and things to ensure that half of our sample consists of mothers and the other half of fathers. So as we walk through setting up this sample study, you'll learn some of the things about how to use demographic targeting options, in-survey screening questions, survey quotas, and more. So this here is our prime panels study setup and user interface. If you're familiar with CloudResearch's MTurk toolkit, the look and feel of these options should be pretty familiar. But in order to set up a study, you first begin by providing some basic information. So you give your project a name. This is an internal name that's not displayed to participants. So if you have, conventions on your team or something that you want to use to track and make sense of that, you can do that here. And then you can give it a project title, which will be public. And we often recommend something kind of vague that doesn't really introduce any self-selection bias or anything like that. So I'm just going to say psychology study. Next, you can select which platform you're hosting your survey on. And when you select an option, like let's say Qualtrics, you're going to get some instructions that show you how to capture each person's unique assignment ID. This is like a unique identifier that is unique to each participant. It allows you to manage data submissions after the study is over, and in some cases to follow up with those people. So you get some information on how to use embedded data in your survey to capture this from the URL. And then you also get some information on how to set up an end of study redirect. Not everyone is familiar with end of study redirects, but essentially, instead of using a completion code that people submit with their assignment on the last page of your survey, you program this automatic redirect. So people who reach the end of your survey are automatically directed to this new URL link. It records evidence that they've completed your project. So we have instructions that show you how to do that here. The next step in setting up your study is to specify some basic details. So in this project, right, we're going to recruit 500 people. We'll say that this project can take about 15 minutes to complete. And you can see as I change these details here and the number of participants I'm recruiting and how long it's going to take them to complete my study, our price calculator over here on the side changes, and it shows you how much your study is going to cost. So the kind of main drivers of cost in all online research are the number of people that you're recruiting, how difficult or easy it is to reach them, and then how long you need them to participate in your project for. So as you increase the time or add demographic targeting options, which we'll do in a minute, you'll see that the price of the project is going to go up. Next, there's an option for you to add your URL for whatever project. So whatever third-party link you have programmed, Qualtrics, something you build on your own, you just paste that link in here. There's a couple of other options here, kind of for your team to notify people when the project goes live or when it completes. Probably the thing worth pointing out is there's an option to control the device that people are using. So you can limit people to write just a desktop, or it can allow responses to come in from a mobile device. This affects feasibility a little bit, but you have the option to control that there. So going into demographics, this is where you have the option to start targeting your participants. And we refer to the targeting options here in this in the online platform as level 1 targeting, because it relies on data that's previously been gathered by the source of participants, the sample suppliers. So you can see there are a number of options here. This is not the full list of demographic targeting options within Prime Panels. Again, those projects that really recruit difficult to find people, like 100 headstone engravers, those are the types of projects that might require some assistance for managed research or some screening within the study. You can see it's also worth pointing out here that so you can specify the language and the country that your project is being launched in. We just recently expanded the number of studies that you can use our online tools for. So you can see you can actually sample people in Portugal, Argentina, Colombia, China, Brazil. There's a list of kind of growing and expanding international capabilities here. So for our project, we want to make sure that everyone directed to this study is a parent. And so to do that, I'm just going to look for the demographic option about having children and add in all of these selections that as long as people have a child under the age of 18, they're eligible to participate in our study. And the panel providers, the source of participants, they're going to use this information to decide who to direct to the study. All right, so once we make all those selections, we then have the option to set some quotas for our project. So quotas help configure the composition of your sample, and you can build your own quotas, or you can apply a census matched template. If you apply the census matched template, you can see here you get quotas automatically populated for participant gender, the age of participants, ethnicity as Hispanic and Latino or not Hispanic and Latino, and then participant race. And the proportion of people that you're going to get in each of these categories is in relation to the latest numbers from the US Census. So it's a quick way to try to increase the representation of the sample that you're gathering. Alternatively, you can build your own quotas. So as I mentioned earlier, we want half of our participants to be mothers and the other half fathers. So we're going to just add some quotas here for participant gender. And the bin sizes that you add in here, they just need to add up to 100%. All right, so the final page in setting up a prime panel study is this additional screening option, which offers a number of really kind of advanced options for screening and targeting participants that aren't traditionally available on crowdsourced sites or some of the other sites that researchers might be familiar with using. So these in-survey screening options include asking people demographic questions within the study to identify criteria that the panel providers have probably not asked people before. It includes setting quotas based on those questions that are asked within the study, and setting up some options to use things like attention checks and to automatically end the participation of anyone who fails those checks as the study's live. So this is a way to manage data quality. People who might be inattentive or not providing good quality data, you can kind of just direct them out of your study after they fail, let's say 2 or 3 attention checks, and have them replaced while the project is live. So if you click on one of these options, right, are you using additional demographic screening questions? If I say yes and click that, I get this redirect link. And the important thing to know about these redirect links is that the panel providers, right, they're sending participants to your study, people who meet whatever criteria you've set up. They use the information from these redirect links to understand why people who are sent to the project may not complete it. And so if people are being sent to this link that informs the panel, that person doesn't meet your demographic targeting criteria, the panel uses that information. And so it's just important to make sure that you're kind of programming these links for the right reasons and redirecting people out of the study. So I'm not going to have the time to show you exactly how to set up these, how to program these redirect links. That's really what our tutorial is about. We have this nice video that goes along with the tutorial, kind of walking you through programming these things in Qualtrics and other survey platforms. But I can talk about conceptually what they do. And so in our study, right, we're interested in finding people, 250 people who have a child diagnosed with autism. So we can program some questions in our survey that ask people, confirm characteristics that we're getting from the platform, that people are a parent, they have a child under the age of 18. And then we would ask, a general screening question. Do you have a child that's been diagnosed with any of these, medical conditions? And if people selected that they have a child who's been diagnosed with autism, they meet the criteria. We would set up some quotas so that we get 250 people who say that they don't have a child diagnosed with autism. And then after that point, anyone who doesn't meet our criteria gets screened out of the study. That's what these demographic questions can allow you to do, as well as setting up within study quotas based on people's answers to that question. So we refer to this in-survey screening and quota options as level 2 screening. And again, that's because these are characteristics that the panel probably has not asked people before. The panel providing the participants probably hasn't asked them things about, do they have a child diagnosed with autism, or the types of products that they buy, or whether or not they drive a particular type of car. But these online panels allow you to ask these questions within the study and to screen out people who don't meet your criteria. And that's a bit different than the way crowdsourced platforms work. So it's a particularly valuable source of demographic targeting. once you begin using these in-survey screening questions, you have to specify something called the incidence rate. And again, if you work in industry, you're very familiar with this, but if you work in academia, the idea of calculating an incidence rate or estimating it is probably very unfamiliar. So an incidence rate is the percentage of people that you expect to pass your within survey screening questions and to be qualified for your study. So in a general population study, the incidence rate is going to be 100% because everyone should qualify for your study. But if you're using some demographic screening questions, you then have to estimate how many people who are sent to my project do I expect to pass it. And I can tell you from doing the math when we put together this tutorial that the way things break out here, your incidence rate is going to be pretty small for a sample of 500 people, half of whom have a child diagnosed with autism. But you provide your estimate of the incidence rate here. So let's say it might be quite low for this project. If it's below a certain threshold, you'll get a note here on the side saying that this might be more efficient to run with our managed research service. And I think that is about it's about a 30% threshold, but it is required to provide an estimate of incidence rate when you're using within survey screening questions. If you're unsure about how to estimate incidence rates, there are a couple of things you can do. You can consult base rate statistics within the general population. You can conduct a small pilot study in order to examine how many people meet that criteria, or you can always speak with the panel company that is providing your participants. All right, so another aspect of level 2 demographic targeting is that you can set up quotas again, and these would be quotas based on those questions that you're asking within the survey. So conceptually, what we would do with these level 2 quotas is set up some things in Qualtrics where once we reach, it's going to be easier to find 250 parents of children who do not have autism than children who do. And so once we reach that point where we have 250 people who kind of fill that bin, we would then start redirecting people out of the survey and allow our other bin of parents who have a child with autism to continue to fill up. So conceptually, that's what these in-survey quotas allow you to do. And then the final option here is to manage data quality. So as I mentioned, you can set up some attention check questions or some other items within your survey. And if people fail a couple of those, then you can redirect them to this link. And it's a way to manage data quality as the project is live. And so rather than waiting till the end and then having to reject people or deal with screening and stuff afterwards, it's a way to replace participants and keep the study going while it's live. All right, so once you're all done making these selections and kind of pairing the programming in your survey with what the selections you've made here on the panel, you just save your project and then it'll appear on your dashboard and you'll have some different options for launching that study. So we left off there talking a little bit about panel data quality, and it's something that I'd like to say a few more words about. So if you've attended some of the earlier talks today, you again have seen some of the data quality problems in all online sources, but in particular from these online panels. So research shows that about 30 to 50% of participants routinely fail attention checks and other types of data quality measures. And at CloudResearch, I can tell you that we see a lot of the same signs of low quality participants or signs of fraud in these online panels as we see in other sources of online participants. And so it's important to be aware of and know how to manage data quality when you're using these sources. And just to give you kind of a visual of what we're kind of talking about here. So if you're looking at a crowdsourced platform, something like Mechanical Turk, I know this image might be a little bit blurry. Hopefully it's coming through clear, but you're talking about a population of about 100,000 people per year. And most of the people in that platform historically, right, have provided high quality data. They're what we would call attentive. And so you have some issues with data quality that you need to manage, but most of the people in crowdsourced platforms are engaged. They're willing to complete really long or difficult projects. And so you have a large share of people on that platform who we would consider attentive and high quality participants. In market research panels, you can see, first of all, that you have exponentially more participants. So the overall pool is just way larger. But you also have a much larger share of inattentive participants. And so in order to get to that group of really good participants who are diverse and who meet all kinds of hard to reach demographic characteristics and provide good data, you need to screen through the inattentive participants, right? So there's a lot of good participants, way more than on the than a crowdsourced platform, but you have to do more screening to get to them. And that's some of what CloudResearch has been working on for the last several years. So we have a paper that we published in 2019 showing what data quality looks like if you sample from our Prime Panels platform with people who are screened, people who are not screened, and we compare that to a sample from Mechanical Turk. Once you screen through participants, you end up with a population of people who are often less exposed to the types of measures that academic social scientists might use. So they're less familiar with things like the trolley dilemma, other kind of commonly used things like the cognitive reflection task. They've seen just less of these tasks that researchers often use. Our paper also shows that these people provide high quality data and that their demographic characteristics are generally reflective of the US population. And they're a little bit older, there's more political diversity, so they don't suffer from some of the same sources of bias that participants in crowdsourced platforms often do. And over the last couple of years, CloudResearch has kind of continued to work on our vetting methods. If you attend Caskey Rosenzweig's talk a little bit later on this afternoon, he'll go into what our Sentry data quality vetting system does a lot more. But conceptually, Sentry is a pre-survey vetting system. And so participants are sent from any sample supplier into our Sentry system. They're vetted in about 30 to 45 seconds. So we have a set of questions looking at data quality and looking at some technical checks. We make sure participants aren't showing signs of fraudulent behavior. And if people pass our Sentry vetting system, they then continue on to your survey as a researcher. If they fail our questions and show signs of fraudulent behavior, they're directed back to the sample supplier. And again, this happens in about 30 to 45 seconds. So I actually have here a short video that's going to show you a little bit of what Sentry looks like in action. So you'll see first that there are some questions that get presented here, English language association questions. We have a large pool of hundreds and hundreds of questions so that participants don't see the same one. They can't learn what the responses are. You see there's an event streamer here. So we're capturing things like mouse movements. We're capturing things like translation of text within the survey, whether or not people are copying, pasting answers, or using kind of an auto fill form to answer survey kind of questions and fill in bubbles. You'll see there's a word that gets copy and pasted here without typing. So we're able to look at what participants are doing in Sentry and pair that with our behavioral data from our intention checks and other questions, and then make a decision about whether or not this person is likely to provide high quality data in your project or not. Just to give you one more look here. So this is another screen grab from Sentry. You can see there's an English language association question here, and someone is translating that question into another language like Chinese or something, right? So we're able to see when participants are using these sorts of tools and to make a judgment about whether or not that's the type of person that you're trying to recruit into your study. So our tutorial goes into this a lot more, but there are a couple of different ways that you can manage data quality. This first one is to, again, set up attention checks or other things within your study and to terminate or end the participation of people who are providing low quality data. I should have said, I guess, to back up a second, that Sentry does a good job at identifying a lot of these fraudulent participants, but it is a less than a minute check, and so no source of vetting is going to be perfect. We think it gets you a good deal of the way there in terms of identifying high quality participants, but it's important to pair that with some of these strategies for managing data quality in the study, like terminating people who might fail attention checks in your study. Another thing that you can do when you're using Prime Panels is reject and then reconcile up to 30% of your participants after the project is closed. So let's say that your project closes and you're screening the data and you find some low quality responses, some things that you can't use. You can then choose to reject those participants and have them replaced as long as it happens within like 10 days or so of the project closing. And then in some cases, screening for participant demographic characteristics within the study is another way to improve data quality, especially for demographic characteristics that change really quickly. So you can imagine someone gets a nice raise at work, or unfortunately might be laid off from their position. The first thing that person thinks is not, I should run and update my demographic profile on the platform that I use to take online surveys, right? So there's a lot of times where you're screening for certain demographic characteristics that can change relatively quickly. And it's actually more efficient to ask those questions within the survey than to rely on the panel provider data, which might be several months or more old. And so identifying people by asking screening questions in the survey can also be a small way to kind of improve data quality. All right, so that is an overview of our Prime Panels platform and some of the ways that you can use it to identify hard to reach groups of participants and to collect data with groups of participants not available in other sources, and be happy to answer any questions that people have.